Anxious attachment in an age of culture collision. We are free like someone dropped in a maze without walls, moving fast, going nowhere, bruising ourselves on the corners of invisible things. From The Subtle Art of Not Defining Culture, by Fred Falloon, there is a kind of sickness that does not come from pain, but from possibility, a sickness not of the body, but of the soul. Its symptom is dizziness, and its cause is freedom. Soren Kierkegaard called it anxiety, not the nervousness of the overworked or the worry of those in danger, but a deeper tremor. The feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, not because you might fall, but because you might jump. The terror of your own agency, the burden of choice. For Kierkegaard, anxiety was not an error in the system. It was the cost of consciousness. To be aware of one's freedom is to be aware that nothing is finally guaranteed, that even the best life can be ruined, that even the truest love can be rejected, that even the most noble path can be abandoned by your own feet. This freedom is what makes us human and what makes us tremble. But Kierkegaard did not believe this trembling could be removed, only redeemed. In a world grounded in faith, tradition, and moral narrative, anxiety could be integrated. The individual, in facing the abyss, would discover not only his freedom but his limit, his need for something greater than himself to orient his choices. God, in this schema, was not a cosmic tyrant, but the steadying horizon of selfhood. Without him, possibility becomes panic. Now imagine that same anxiety, but stripped of its context, untethered from faith, unbounded by ritual, multiplied by algorithm. This is the condition of the modern soul, no longer dizzy at the cliff's edge, but suspended in air, with no edge, no ground, and no voice to tell you which way is up. In a culture of endless possibility, every path becomes a burden. Every option becomes a question: what if this was the wrong one? The self must now be built, not inherited. Identity must be curated, not received. Belief must be justified, not practiced. Even love becomes a choice among choices, filtered and sorted, and never quite settled. Each moment demands that you decide who to be, how to speak, what to signal, and what it all means. And so, like the child of anxious attachment, the modern subject becomes caught in loops of self-construction. He does not rest. He cannot. To rest would be to risk the wrong self, the less optimized version. There is always another possibility, another reinvention, another performance, but no moment of peace, no Sabbath for the soul. This is not freedom, it is vertigo. It is the dizzying weight of infinite selves waiting to be chosen, none of which are ever quite complete. And beneath it, the same hunger. If I build the right life, will I finally be held? But possibility, without grounding, becomes torment, and meaning without rootedness becomes a trap of perpetual becoming. We strive, not toward purpose, but away from collapse. We post, not to speak, but to prove we still exist. We choose, not because we know what we want, but because we fear being left behind by those who chose faster. What once felt like opportunity now feels like obligation. Kierkegaard saw it coming. He knew that man untethered from tradition would not simply float. He would fall, not into death, but into an anxiety that would mimic life, productive, expressive, dynamic, and yet hollow, a motion without rest, a freedom without form. And so we look busy, but feel weightless. We speak often, but rarely land. We move not with purpose, but with pressure, shaped by the need to appear in motion. In the absence of inherited structure, we build with urgency. We construct cells from fragments, adopt symbols we do not understand, say words we do not trust. But what we are seeking is not speed, it is anchoring, something that names us without demanding performance, something that stays even when we falter. When the noise pretends to be signal and leads us astray, we reach for a map. We reach for language, not as ornament or expression, but as orientation. Words once gave us this. They bound the present to memory and stretched it forward into expectation. They let us know where we were and to whom we were speaking. They named our condition before we could. They did not need to be profound. They needed only to be reliable. But the reliability is gone. The compass has begun to spin. Language now drifts. Not because we are careless, but because the structures that once gave words their direction have frayed. A word no longer means what it did last year. Sometimes not even what it meant yesterday. The same sentence can exonerate or condemn depending on the hour, the platform, or the listener's affiliation. Even truth, when spoken, is suspected of irony. We no longer know which tone to trust, our own included. Once, the native mother tongue dialect taught us to speak as one speaks to family, intimate, instinctive, thick with memory. We did not learn it, we absorbed it. Its sounds carried affection and rhythm before they carried propositions. Even disagreement within it assumed a kind of safety. It was the voice of home, even when spoken far away. Now it feels thin, dislocated, scrubbed and stretched by screens, by ideology, by mimicry. Its intimacy is performed, its simplicity, suspect. We are no longer certain whether our first words still belong to us. Then there was the father tongue, the formal speech of public order, of law, of the nation's promise to itself. Its cadence came from ceremony and consequence. It did not flatter, but it named. It could be stern, but it stood still. One entered it like one enters a courtroom or a church, with recognition, if not always with comfort. Now it stammers, translated too many times into management speak, automated reply, abstract jargon. Its authority is hollow or outsourced. Its grammar is procedural, its metaphors borrowed from branding decks. Where it once bound us in covenant, it now binds us in contracts. Between these losses, we find ourselves increasingly unable to speak with confidence, not because we have nothing to say, but because we are no longer sure what our words do. We become cautious, then performative, then silent. We ask ourselves before every utterance, will this be understood? Will this offend? Will this return to me changed, twisted, condemned? The consequence is deeper than mere confusion. Language no longer positions us in the world. It no longer allows us to place others or ourselves. It fails to bear the weight of orientation. It cannot teach the child who he is, or the elder what to pass on. It cannot tell the lover how to commit, or the mourner how to name the loss. It loops in slogans. It circles in euphemism. It does not land. And yet we go on speaking. Because to speak is human, even when the meanings shift beneath our feet. We speak like sailors sending flares in a fog, like exiles repeating phrases in the hope of a border guard who still remembers what they meant. We speak, not because we expect to be understood, but because the silence feels like erasure. The problem is not that we have too little language. It is that we have no place to put it. What culture once did, through shared rhythm, memory, repetition, ceremony, was give language a home. It tied words to acts, and acts to meaning, and meaning to something deeper than opinion. It made speech stable enough to carry emotion. It made silence meaningful too. Now, we live in a world where everything is said, and almost nothing is believed. And beneath that flood of talk, the soul grows hesitant. Not because it is mute, but because it can no longer find the tone that returns. The result is not just self-censorship, but self-fracture. We begin to speak in dialects we do not believe. We become multilingual in performance, one tone for work, another for online, another for friends, another for family, each governed by different rules, different taboos, different gods, and none of them rooted in soil, none of them old enough to trust. And yet, we go on speaking. We reach for words like flares, hoping someone, somewhere, will understand what we meant before the meaning shifts again. We no longer believe in language, but we cannot live without it. We speak not because we are confident, but because we are lost. And in that loss, we find again the ache of the child in the hallway, calling out, not for novelty, but for a voice that says, I know what you meant. I am still here. There was a time when culture felt like weather, not something one debated, but something one inhabited. It gave texture to life, without needing constant explanation. The handshake meant one thing. The silence at a grave meant another. Sunday meant rest. The old song meant home. These meanings were not voted on, they were lived. And because they were shared, life had rhythm. But modernity has brought with it not merely pluralism, but contradiction. We are no longer living in a single symbolic world, but in many, layered, intersecting, often opposed. The same gesture can now offend or endear, depending on which observer sees it. The same value can signal virtue in one room, and vice in another. Words like justice, freedom, truth, identity do not clarify, they divide. We no longer live in a shared atmosphere. We live in adjacent realities. It is not that diversity is new. What is new is the constant collision, the unmediated immediacy of every worldview, every interpretation, every offense arriving all at once, without ritual or translation. The village once had boundaries. Its culture was passed down. Its meaning systems were stable. A child knew, more or less, what to expect. Now, the village is the internet, and the internet has no elders, only reactions. In such a world, the feedback loops that once anchored identity have become volatile. A child does not know whether the story he is told at home will match what he hears in school. The rituals of his grandparents are no longer honored in public. The speech of his parents is mocked by comedians or banned by moderators. The maps he inherited from the past do not line up with the landscape of the present. And so he becomes, like the anxious infant, unsure of what response his next gesture will receive. This is not the loneliness of isolation. It is the panic of unpredictability. The same words yield different meanings. The same actions provoke different judgments. Culture no longer offers continuity, it offers chaos. The social fabric, once stitched with rhythm and trust, now flutters in a wind of endless signals. And so the modern person becomes epistemically hypervigilant. He must constantly scan the room, the thread, the climate. He must ask, before every sentence, who is listening? What is allowed today? What changed overnight? He no longer speaks in order to share meaning. He speaks to avoid error, to avoid exile. And the words he uses are no longer trusted, not even by himself. This is the deeper anxiety beneath our cultural moment. It is not only political or psychological, it is civilizational. We no longer know which meanings will last. We no longer know who has the authority to say what is true. We no longer know how to belong in a world that cannot agree on what belonging means. We live, as Kierkegaard foresaw, in the dizziness of freedom, and yet we reach. We go on seeking coherence, not because we are naive, but because we are human. The desire for a world that makes sense is not a reactionary impulse. It is the condition of sanity. We need symbolic gravity to walk upright. We need shared time to hope. We need words that carry across generations if we are to feel ourselves more than temporary. This is not a call for monoculture. It is a call for rhythm, for structure, for ritual, not because they are perfect, but because they allow us to become. Without them, every self is provisional. Every relationship is negotiation. Every identity is performance. And every moment is saturated with the fear that the rules may have changed. And so we live not in culture, but in its collision. And the result is not liberation. It is anxiety, a people suspended in endless interpretation, longing not for simplicity, but for something to trust. If anxiety is the feeling of being unheld, then coherence is the feeling of being gathered, not explained, not managed, not controlled, gathered. To be coherent is not to have all the answers, but to live in a world where your speech and your soul are not strangers, where meaning meets rhythm, where the past is not rubble and the future not fog. We often speak of freedom as the highest good, but what is freedom if it floats unmoored? We chase the liberty to define ourselves, but without coherence, this becomes a sentence, not a gift. To say you are free in a shattered world is like telling a ship it may sail anywhere while removing the stars. What we need is not more options. What we need is more orientation. We might begin finally by asking how a person comes to know where they stand, not in terms of geography, but in terms of belonging, not what direction is north, but what direction is home. And we must go back further than philosophy, further even than speech. We must go back to the child in the crib. Before we speak, we cry. Before we understand, we feel. And before we are told anything about the world, we learn, without being taught, what kind of world it is. This is not a matter of instruction. It is a matter of response. A baby does not reason about the nature of care. He simply reaches. And the question is always the same: will someone reach back? Attachment theory, as it came to be called, observed this reaching. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth gave form to something that had always been true, that our sense of safety, and therefore of self, is built on whether our needs are met in a pattern we can trust. When a mother hears the cry and comes, not just once but again and again, the child begins to believe without thinking that the world has a shape, that the cry means something. That presence can be relied upon. But when the pattern fails, when love arrives some days and vanishes on others, then the child cannot know what to expect. One day the reaching is rewarded, the next, ignored. A smile is met with warmth, then with weariness, then with nothing. And so the child does what any intelligent creature would do in a world without rhythm. He watches. He waits. He learns to scan for clues, to anticipate moods, to perform whatever version of himself seems most likely to draw love nearer. This is not cunning. It is sorrowful intelligence. It is what we call anxious attachment. The child is not too needy. He is uncertain. He is not desperate by nature, but made desperate by uncertainty. And since he cannot change the world, he changes himself. He tries harder. He becomes sweeter, more careful, more alert. He learns to make himself agreeable, indispensable, small. And this habit, once formed, is not easy to unlearn. It becomes a style of soul. Even as the body grows, the question remains the same. If I reach, will someone answer? And if they do, will they stay? We do not all carry this wound, but many do. And in a world that no longer speaks with one voice, that no longer gives us the comfort of shared symbols or settled meaning, that early hunger, unsure, reaching, vigilant, finds a strange kind of echo. A world of unstable signals makes anxious children of us all. What begins as a reaching hand becomes, over time, a posture, not just toward one person, but toward the world. The child grows older and taller and more articulate, but inside, the question has not been answered. And so it is asked again and again, though now in different forms, through relationships, work, even belief. The anxious adult does not enter a room. He scans it. He does not speak freely. He gauges the tone first. He does not rest after offering love. He waits for signs that it was accepted. Every silence feels charged. Every delay is a verdict. A moment of unreturned affection is not merely disappointing, it is destabilizing. This is not because he lacks confidence. Often he appears quite the opposite, attentive, sensitive, even charismatic. But what others experience as presence is often vigilance. He has learned to read the emotional weather better than most. And yet, he does not feel safe in it. He feels responsible for it. This is the anxious soul, always tending, always adjusting, always trying to keep what cannot be kept by effort alone. And it is exhausting. Affection does not soothe for long. It raises the stakes. Silence does not offer rest. It becomes a riddle to solve. The anxious adult checks, rechecks, over-explains, seeks reassurance not because he is shallow, but because he remembers too well what inconsistency feels like. He cannot tell if love will last, so he tries to make it last by doing more, by being more, by never being still. This pattern seeps into every area of life, into work, overachievement, driven not by ambition, but by fear of being dispensable, into friendship, the tendency to overgive, to apologize for existing, to interpret absence as rejection, into self-perception, a constant low hum of doubt, the belief that one must always be earning one's place. But most of all, it touches love. Where there should be trust, there is testing. Where there should be rest, there is proving. The anxious person does not flee intimacy. They crave it. But they crave it like the child who is never sure whether the parent is really listening. And so they speak too much, or too carefully, or not at all. And every word is another attempt to ask, without quite asking, will you still be here tomorrow? This is not madness. It is memory. And when the culture around this soul mirrors back that same instability, when meaning shifts, when responses are inconsistent, when praise turns to punishment without warning, the anxiety is no longer personal. It becomes atmospheric. The same nervous tuning once reserved for a parent is now applied to everything, to institutions, to social media, to friendship, even to faith. The result is not drama. It is fatigue. A fatigue that settles into the bones of a generation that has been taught to be charming, useful, and terrified all at once. Where there is uncertainty, there will always be someone who offers certainty. That is the great danger for the anxious. They long not simply to be loved, but to be sure they are loved. And the world is never short of people willing to promise that certainty, at a cost. Enter the narcissist, not the cartoon villain, nor merely the vain. The true narcissist is something colder, emptier, harder to detect. He offers affection without intimacy, guidance without empathy, presence without availability. He mirrors the anxious person's longing, reflecting back the light they so desperately give, until the anxious soul begins to orbit him like a small planet caught in an artificial gravity. It begins beautifully. The narcissist praises, validates, draws close. He seems at first like the answer to the silent question the anxious have always carried, am I enough now? And, for a brief moment, the answer feels like yes. But then comes the turn. Affection becomes conditional. Presence becomes erratic. Praise is withdrawn not with explanation, but with implication. You did something wrong, but you're not told what. And so, the anxious person does what they have always done. They try harder. This is the cruel genius of the dynamic. The more unstable the love, the more the anxious soul clings. The narcissist offers no rhythm and therefore remains the center of the anxious person's attention. They learn to regulate their sense of worth based on his signals. The dance is relentless. The rules change. The anxious soul adapts, and in doing so, they are slowly emptied. This is not because they are weak, but because they were trained, long ago, to interpret inconsistency as a challenge rather than a warning. They were shaped to believe that love must be earned again and again, and that to be abandoned is always somehow their fault. The narcissist confirms this belief while never saying it outright. He simply withholds, and watches the anxious soul fill the silence with apology, with effort, with pain. Such a person does not just attach, they serve. They become emotionally available in ways that seem noble, even spiritual, but which are, underneath, desperate. Desperate to stop the cycle. Desperate to be enough for long enough that the withdrawal does not return. But it always returns, because the narcissist does not need love. He needs supply, and so the anxious person is devoured. This may happen in relationships, but it also happens in systems. In workplaces that praise you for your loyalty, then cut you loose. In institutions that preach authenticity, then punish unsanctioned sincerity. In digital platforms that affirm you one day, erase you the next. The pattern is the same: unstable feedback, intermittent reward, emotional labor flowing only one way. We do not always notice the pattern, especially if it mimics the emotional logic we learned as children. Especially if it echoes a childhood logic we never thought to question. But it is there, quiet and consuming. And it feeds not only on our effort, but on our hope. It would be a mercy if this pattern ended at the level of the personal, if it were confined to bad relationships or broken families. But what we find, looking out as well as in, is something more chilling, that our culture itself has come to mirror the logic of the narcissist. It draws us in with promises of affirmation, of visibility, of connection, and then it vanishes or turns. The signals it gives are real enough: a like, a view count, a follower, a comment, a promotion, a spotlight. For a moment, they soothe the anxious heart. They seem to answer the old question, you are seen, you are valuable. But then the signals disappear, or change, or contradict. The same sentence that earned praise last year now earns suspicion. The same identity that once brought belonging now triggers scrutiny. The same post, the same gesture, the same words now cause offense, or fall flat, or simply fade into silence. And so we try again. We scroll longer. We update more. We apologize preemptively. We seek the right words, the right cause, the right tone, the right self. Not because we are shallow, because we are hungry, because the loop never closes, because the love is never settled, because the platform, the employer, the institution speaks to us in the same voice the narcissist uses. Prove yourself again. Be what I need today. Entertain me. Confess. Adjust. And maybe, just maybe, I'll keep you. This is not just emotional exploitation. It is existential dislocation. Democracy was once a covenant between people who shared a fate. It has become a stage play of inclusion for people who share nothing but a border. The citizen no longer receives loyalty, only slogans. No longer inheritance, only reminders of his privilege. He is promised a voice, then drowned out by noise, by imported votes, imported values, imported identities. A country that once asked its people to build, now asks them to accommodate. And all of this, we are told, is empowerment. But what is empowerment without memory? What is a voice when the meaning of every word changes each year? One cannot attach to a system that refuses to stay still. One cannot love a nation that does not remember its own name. Every few years, a new moral vision is paraded out. The rituals change. The language shifts. What was virtue yesterday is suspicion today. What was home is now a problem. The citizen becomes exhausted, not from hatred, but from trying to keep up. From being loyal to a structure that demands adjustment, never loyalty in return. It is the logic of a narcissist. You must accept who I've become today. You must forget what I said yesterday. And you must thank me for including you at all. This is not inclusion. It is erasure disguised as openness. A people cannot attach to a culture that disorients them. And disoriented people do not become free. They become anxious, reactive, compliant. The system flatters them, discards them, then accuses them of fragility when they ask what happened. Capitalism does not want to know you. It does not want you whole, or named, or rooted. It wants you useful. A worker, a unit, a grey silhouette with an up-to-date CV and a flexible moral grammar. You are not a son, or a daughter, or a member of anything that might demand loyalty. You are Homo economicus, a man measured by what he can move, produce, optimize, and abandon. In such a world, the highest virtue is utility, not love, not duty, not memory. Utility, and utility does not sit still. It does not make room for long-standing ties. If something else pays better, you move. If another job offers marginally more, you go. If the market shifts, you shift with it. To stay, to belong, is to fall behind. You are taught to treat your roots as liabilities and your attachments as inefficiencies. And if you protest, if you ask where home has gone, you are told to go find yourself, to build your brand, to express your values. But the only values available are those that can be marketed. You are given an identity kit, a set of curated slogans, beliefs, aesthetics, and hashtags. You are sold a self, and then sold the accessories to match. You are not a person. You are a display shelf. Capitalism does not extract from the self. It hollows it out. It tells you to be authentic, but only in ways that track, scale, and sell. It offers you freedom from history, but binds you to the marketplace. You are always replaceable. You are expected to feel proud of that. This is not a system that wants human beings. It wants adaptable functions in human form, always anxious, always searching, always consuming. And if you hesitate, if you ask what any of this is for, the answer is simple. It's for slightly more reach, slightly more status, slightly more performance, slightly more utility, and then you will be discarded, with thanks, and replaced by another. Democracy promised you a voice, but changed the language. Capitalism promised you freedom, but sold you a self. Together, they have produced a world where no one stays still long enough to be known, and where every gesture, every word, every identity is subject to review. The citizen becomes anxious because the nation forgets him. The worker becomes anxious because the system replaces him. The individual, stripped of memory and inheritance, is told to construct his self from scratch, again and again, using whatever pieces the market has left on the shelf. In such a world, you are always in performance. You are praised, then ignored. You are affirmed, then extracted. You are offered community, but only on terms that shift without warning. You begin to speak not to connect, but to avoid exile. You no longer believe in anything holding, but you try anyway, because something in you still wants to be held. We have built a society that behaves like a narcissistic partner. It love bombs, then withdraws. It mirrors, then disappears. Unpredictability that once taught us to cling. It authenticity, but sells identity. It performance, and calls presence. It asks us to bring ourselves, and edits what? From childhood to seek belonging through performance. Become the ideal citizens. This system, participants in a shared tradition, but hyper-attuned, constantly, of world. We live in fear of being much, of being seen, is not, we don't. If our speech still mean the same thing when we are told free, but we speak like people. We are told we are empowered, but we move like people in search of permission. In this way, culture no longer forms us. It feeds us rhythm. It gives tasks. Gives content. It does not raise us. Holds us in, and so the child in the becomes the adult at the screen. The same question in both cases, is anyone really there? And if they are, will they still be there tomorrow?